Now, the purpose of the Bible is to testify of Jesus Christ. The Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, points to Christ.
The Bible is true in a very strange way. What you do as an educated person is sample that structure that constitutes the sum total of the texts of our civilization.
Because if those four things are true, that there's truth, that God exists, that miracles are possible, and the New Testament is reliable enough to let us know that the resurrection occurred, then Christianity is true. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity is true.
So, what is the food you give to the soul? It is reading the Bible, the Word of God. And I don't care who you are, you cannot live a victorious life if you neglect Bible reading and Bible study.
But what we have at stake here is far more than that. You know, your life depends on this book. So read it.
Pulpit Commentary, Leviticus chapter 2 verse 1. And when any will offer a meat offering unto the Lord. The word used in the original for meat offering mincha means, like its Greek equivalent, Delta-omicronu, a gift made by an inferior to a superior. Thus the sacrifices of Cain and Abel were their mincha to God. Genesis chapter 4 verses 3 and 4. The present sent to Esau by Jacob was his mincha. Genesis chapter 32 verse 13. And the present to Joseph was his brethren's mincha. Genesis chapter 43 v. 11. It is therefore equivalent to a gift of homage, which recognizes the superiority of him to whom it is offered, and ceremonially promises loyal obedience to him. Owing to its use in this passage, it came gradually to be confined in its signification to vegetable gifts, unbloody sacrifices, as they are called sometimes, in contrast to animal sacrifices, while the word korban kron to be used in the wider acceptation, which once belonged to mincha. The conditions to be fulfilled by the Israelite who offered a meat offering were the following. 1. He must offer either 1. Uncooked flour with oil, salt, and frankincense, or 2. Flour made into an unleavened cake, whether of the nature of biscuit or pancake, with oil, salt, and frankincense, or 3. Roasted grains with oil, salt, and frankincense. 2. He must bring his offering to the court of the tabernacle, and give to the priests at least as much as 1 omer, that is, nearly a gallon, and not more than 61 omers. The priest receiving it from him must, 1. Take a handful of the flour, oil, and salt, or a proportionate part of the cake. Each omer generally made 10 cakes in place of the flour, and burn it with all the frankincense as a memorial upon the altar of burnt offering. 2. With his brother priests he must eat the remainder within the precincts of the tabernacle. Here the essentials of the sacrifice are the presentation made by the offerer, and the burning of the memorial on the altar, followed by the consumption of the remainder by the priests. The moral lesson taught to the Israelite completed that of the burnt offering. As the burnt offering taught self-surrender, so the meat offering taught recognition of God's supremacy and submission to it, the first by the surrender of a living creature substituted for the offerer, the second by the gift of a part of the good things bestowed by God on man for the preservation of life, which, being given back to God, serve as a recognition of his supremacy. Spiritually, the lesson taught the Jew was that of the necessity of a loyal service to God, and mystically he may have learnt a lesson 1. As to the force of prayer rising up to heaven as the incense, which had to be offered with each form of the meat offering. 2. As to the need of purity and incorruption, symbolized by the prohibition of leaven and honey, and the command to use salt. The supplemental character of the meat offering accounts for the order in which it here stands, not arbitrarily interposed between 2 animal sacrifices, but naturally following on the burnt offering as an adjunct to it, and the complement of its teaching. So close was the union between the two sacrifices, that the burnt offering was never offered without the accompaniment of the meat offering. Numbers chapter 15 verse 4. It has been also maintained that the meat offering, like the drink offering, was never made independently of the animal's sacrifice, but this cannot be proved. On the contrary, the manner in which laws regulating it are here laid down lead to the inference that it might be offered, when any willed it, by itself. The close connection between the sacrifice of an animal and the offering of cakes of flour and of wine is noticeable in heathen sacrifices likewise. The very word immolare, translated to sacrifice, is derived from the mola, or salt cake offered with the animal, and the other word ordinarily used in Latin for sacrifice, that is, macter, is derived from the victim being enriched magus optus with the libation of wine. Thus we see that the offering of the fruits of the earth was regarded, elsewhere as well as in Judea, as the natural concomitant of an animal sacrifice. And not only that, but is so essential a part of the latter as to have given a name to the whole ceremony, and not only to the whole ceremony, but to the specific act of the slaughter of the victim. The thought of the heathen in offering the fruits of the earth was probably not much different from that of the Israelites. It was his gift to the superhuman power, to which he thus acknowledged that he owed submission. We may further notice that salt was enjoined in the heathen as in the Jewish sacrifices as indispensable. Pliny says that the importance of salt is seen especially in sacrifices, none of which are completed without the salt cake. Natural History, Book 31. Page 7. The now obsolete use of the word meat in the sense of food, in contrast to flesh, creates some confusion of thought. Fruit offering would be a better title, were it not that the signification of fruit is going through a similar change to that which meat has undergone. Flour offering might be used, but an alteration in the rendering is not imperative. Verse 2. He shall take thereout his handful. This was the task of the priest. The handful that he took and burned upon the altar has the technical and significative name of the memorial. It acted as a memorial before God, in the same way as Cornelius's prayers. And alms, thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. Acts chapter 10 verse 4. Being something which should cause God to think graciously of the offerer. The frankincense is not mixed with the flour and the oil and the salt as a constituent element of the offering, but is placed upon them, and is all of it burnt in the memorial, symbolizing the need of adding prayer to sacrifice, that the latter may be acceptable to God. Verse 3. The remnant of the meat offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. The meat offerings must have gone far to supply the priests with farinaceous food, as, for every handful of flour burned on the altar, nearly a gallon went to the priests. They had to eat it within the precincts of the tabernacle, as was the case with all meats that were most holy, viz., the minches, the shew bread, and the flesh of the sin offering, and of the trespass offering. Leviticus chapter 10 verse 12. Other meats assigned to the priests might be eaten in any clean place. Leviticus chapter 10 verse 14. The priest's own meat offerings were wholly burnt. Leviticus chapter 6 verse 23. Verses 4 through 11. The second form of meat offering, when the flour and oil were made up into 4 varieties of cakes. The ritual of offering is not different from that of the first form. The frankincense is not mentioned, but doubtless is understood. The rabbinical rule, that meat offerings, when following upon burnt offerings, or peace offerings, had no frankincense burnt with them, rests on no solid foundation. Verses 11 and 12. Ye shall burn no leaven nor any honey in any offering of the Lord made by fire. Leaven and honey are not forbidden to be offered to the Lord, on the contrary. In the next verse, they are commanded to be offered. The prohibition only extends to their being burnt on the altar, owing, no doubt, to the effect of fire upon them in making them swell and froth, thus creating a repulsive appearance which, as we shall see, throughout the Mosaic legislation, represents moral evil. The first fruits of honey are to be offered, compare Exodus chapter 22 verse 29. And leaven is to be used in the 2 wave loaves offered at the Feast of Pentecost as firstfruits. Leviticus chapter 23 verse 17. The words translated, "As for the oblation of the firstfruits, ye shall offer them unto the Lord," should be rendered, "As an oblation of firstfruits ye shall offer them," that is, leaven and honey, but they shall not be burnt on the altar. The mark in AV, denoting a new paragraph at the beginning of verse 12, should be removed. Verse 13, "Every oblation of thy meat offering shalt thou season with salt." Salt is commanded as symbolizing in things spiritual, because preserving in things physical. Incorruption, compare Matthew chapter 5 verse 13, Mark chapter 9 verse 49, Luke chapter 14 verse 34, Colossians chapter 4 verse 6. It is an emblem of an established and enduring covenant, such as God's covenant with His people, which is never to wax old and be destroyed, and it is therefore termed the salt of the covenant of thy God. Hence a covenant of salt came to mean a covenant that should not be broken. Numbers chapter 18. Verse 19, 2 Chronicles chapter 13 verse 5. The use of salt is not confined to the meat offering. "With all thine offerings thou shalt offer salt." Accordingly, we find in Ezekiel chapter 43 verse 24, "The priest shall cast salt upon them, and they shall offer them up for a burnt offering." Verses 14 through 16, the third form of meat offering, parched grains of corn with oil, salt, and frankincense. The mark of a new paragraph should be transferred from verse 12 to the beginning of verse 14.